Hi, this is Krista at The Secret Yarnery. Today we are going to learn how to do half double crochet and make another sweet little coaster. To make half double crochet, you will need your yarn. So a 4-weight worsted acrylic yarn is great. I'm using Saver from Ice Yarns, but any worsted weight yarn is fine. I'm using a 6mm or a J hook. You will also need 2 stitch markers and a needle for sewing in your ends and a pair of scissors. So let's get started. So grab your 2 stitch markers, your worsted weight yarn, and your crochet hook, and make your slip knot. So wrap your yarn around 2 fingers, making a little bit of an X. Flip your hand over and poke that working yarn underneath the loop around your fingers and just pull it up. You want to leave a long enough tail to sew in with a needle, so about twice the length of your needle or a bit more. And shrink that down onto your hook. You want to make sure it's on the fat part of your hook. And we want to chain 10. We want to do a relaxed chain. And if you want a refresher on learning to crochet or making a chain, I will link the playlist of my How to Crochet for Beginners classes in the cards, and it's also in the description box down below. So there is my chain 10. So there are my 10 chains. To count your chain, you don't count your knot and you don't count what's on your hook. You just count these loops. There's little V's. So there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 is right underneath the loop on your hook. Now for half double crochet, we're going to chain 2. So just pinching that last chain we made, just pinching it, we want to chain 2. And now we can just chain normally. We don't have to chain particularly loose, but we do want that loop to go right up onto the fat part of our hook. Just like that. So there is our chain 2. So now we're going to put your thumb on those cute V's and turn your work on its side. We want to be looking for our back loops. So right underneath the working yarn is your first loop. Can't really see it. So if you get your needle in there, you can see it's right there kind of hiding out. And our next back loop is right here. So we want to be looking for these camel bumps along the back of our chain. We want to go into this 3rd back loop right here. So to make half double crochet, we have to wrap our yarn first. So that is pushing our hook onto our working yarn and bringing it under and up. And now it is wrapped. Now we can go into that back loop right here. Just use your finger to slide that back loop onto your hook. If it's hard to get your hook in, your chain might be too tight. Now we're going to grab our yarn again. So from under, we're just going to go up and turn your hook so that hook is facing towards you. And we're going to slide it through that very first loop, that back loop. So now we have 3 loops on our hook. Make everything big again on the fat part of your crochet hook. So grab your yarn again, just push your hook down onto your working yarn and up and turn. Slide your hook so that hooky bit is facing you and bring it through those loops. Now I'm pulling right underneath that chain. That's where I'm holding my work, and that keeps those loops nice and open. And bring the hook through. So that is our first half double crochet. So let's put our stitch marker in. So pull a loop up with your hook, take your hook out, hold that loop with your fingers just to kind of keep it out of the way. And we want to be looking for this lasso or this stitch that is around our loop of yarn, our working yarn. We want to go right here. That is our stitch, both strands of that V. So pop your stitch marker in and clip it shut, and that will tell us where our first stitch is of that row. So crochet hook back in, shrink it down, and now we're ready to make our next stitch. Release your fingers a little bit and start looking for that next back loop, which is right here. So wrap your yarn, and into that next back loop, just poke it onto your hook, slide it on, under the working yarn, right underneath that hooky bit, just kind of drag it through. Push everything back up onto the fat part of your hook. Push your hook onto your working yarn, up, turn your hook so the hooky bit is going to grab that yarn, and now slide your yarn through. So turn your hook and slide your hook through all 3 loops and push your hook up. So this is the same as a single crochet, except we're wrapping our yarn first. So wrap your yarn and look for your next camel bump or your next back loop right here. Hold your work, slide that back loop on. Make sure everything's nice and big on the fat part of your hook. Hook under your working yarn and turn so it grabs that yarn. Bring it through that first loop, let go and grab your work again right underneath where that yarn just came from, right underneath that back loop, and push everything big on your hook. Grab your yarn again, turn your hook so it's facing towards you, and slide it through those 3 loops. And again, push your hook all the way through. You want that loop on the fat part of your hook. So again, grab your yarn. Into the next camel bump, just slide it onto your hook. Make everything big. Grab your yarn and bring it through. Release your hands and now grab right underneath where that yarn is coming from. Everything big on your hook. Grab the yarn again, turn your hook, and bring it through all 3 loops. Make it big, and now I'll show you what that looks like in slow motion. Like that. Now we have 1 stitch left. So our last stitch is right on top of our knot. So here is our knot, and this back loop is our last stitch. That's where we're going to make our last half double crochet. So wrap your yarn and into that last stitch, slide it onto your hook, grab your yarn and bring it back. Wrap your yarn and take off all 3 loops. After we've made our last stitch, we can just make a bigger loop again and take our hook out. So now we want to be looking for that last stitch right here, the last stitch that we made, and pop your stitch marker in. And that's going to mark the last stitch of the row. Slide your hook back in, shrink it down, and chain 2. 1 and 2. Now we're going to turn our work. So put your hand underneath your working yarn, grab your work, and bring it towards you. So our very first stitch is right where our stitch marker is. So wrap your yarn and into that same stitch. You can take that stitch marker out if it's in your way. Grab your yarn and bring it through. Push everything big up on your hook. Wrap your yarn and take off all 3 loops. So that is your first half double crochet of the next row. So take that stitch marker out, loop up, just so that hook's not in our way. We want to look for that first stitch, the one we just made right here. We want to pop our stitch marker in, just to mark it so we don't have to worry about it in the future. Snap it shut. So now our stitches look a little bit different because we turned our work, and we're looking for these little dimples right here, all the way along. These little dimples. So we're not going this way. We're going straight into that dimple. So we're going to be pushing our hook straight down and in. And if we put our hook straight down and in to these dimples or these little spots, and you flip your work up, you'll see you have your pretty little V's are right there. So those are our stitches. We want to go straight in to these dimples all the way along our work. So wrap your yarn and into the next stitch right here. Grab your yarn and bring it back. Make everything big on the fat part of your hook. Wrap your yarn, turn your hook so that pointy bit is facing towards you, and slide it through all 3 loops. Make it big again on the fat part of your hook. Move your hands out of the way so you can see our next stitch right here. Wrap your yarn and into the next stitch. Grab your yarn and bring it back. Make everything big on your hook. Wrap your yarn, turn your hook, and take it through all 3 loops. So we're just going to keep doing this all the way along, and I'll show you what it looks like on this row in slow motion. If you're having trouble getting your hook through, so when you go in and you bring it back and then you wrap your yarn, if you're having a hard time getting it through all of these loops, before you wrap your yarn, try just turning your hook a little bit more up towards 12 o'clock, maybe towards 11 o'clock. That'll stretch these loops right here, and that'll help you get your hook through. If you're doing it really tight down here, all your stitches can be small and it can be hard to get your hook through. So hold right underneath where that working yarn is coming from. We want to hold right here, so with your fingers and thumb, and then just kind of tip your hook up, just like that. And that'll size these loops on the fat part of your hook, and then grab your yarn. See how loose it is now? Then grab your yarn, turn your hook facing towards you, and bring it through those loops. So that will make it easier. So grab your yarn, go through, grab your yarn, and bring it back. This is when you want to stretch your loops a little bit. If you're having a really hard time, you can stretch it more. Then grab your yarn and bring it through those loops. So give that a try if you're having a hard time getting it through all 3 loops. And now we're at our last stitch. We have our stitch marker right here. So go into that same spot as your stitch marker, 2 strands of that stitch on the top of your hook, and make your last half double crochet of the row. Just like that. Loop up nice and big, and we can move our stitch marker up. So now start your next row, chain 2, 1 and 2. Turn your work, so slide your hand under that working yarn, bring it through, and our very first stitch is waiting right there with our stitch marker. So wrap your yarn and into that same stitch, 1 half double crochet. So bring your yarn back, size your loops so they're easy for you to work with. Grab your yarn, turn your hook, and bring it through all 3 loops. Pull your loop up. We want to find that last stitch we did right here, and pop your stitch marker onto that last stitch, just like that. And now we're ready to keep working along this row. So for this row, our stitches are right here. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Each of these little dimples is going to be getting a stitch. So wrap your yarn and into each stitch, making sure you get both strands of that V on the top of your hook. Make 1 double crochet into each, making sure you size those loops before you bring your hook through, just so all those loops come off easily. And this takes time. Don't beat yourself up about it. It's tricky. So into the next. Size your loops and just keep working your way along until you get to the end of the row. At the end of your row, pull your hook up again just to get it out of the way so we can put that stitch marker on the last stitch we just made right there. And if you want to count your stitches, it's these little V's at the top. So we have our stitch marker in the very first one. So there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 is with our last stitch marker. So we want to keep 10 stitches. If you're working along without stitch markers, your very first stitch is right here, right after that chain. If you tip your work up, it is this stitch right there. That is your first stitch of the row. And at the end of our row, our chain doesn't count for anything. That's just to get our height. It's our very first stitch right here. And it looks like it's a little bit on a hill. We always have to work into the hill. So our stitch is right there. If you tip your work up, if you pinch it and kind of turn it up, you can see those 2 strands of the V, and that is your last stitch of the row. So wrap your yarn and into the last stitch, 1 half double crochet. So now you can pause the video and keep working along, repeating that same row over and over until you have completed 8 rows. You can count your rows. I like to look at them sideways. I find it easier to identify it if I'm counting like columns. There is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So 8 rows, and chain 1. We always chain 1 after we're finished our work because that is going to be the knot. Cut your yarn, leaving a 3 or 4 inch tail. Pull your hook up and your yarn through and snug that down to secure. Now you're going to sew in your tails and you're finished. If you're not sure how to sew in your tails, I showed you at the end of the single crochet stitch tutorial, and there'll also be a tutorial coming up just on sewing in your ends on different projects. So I hope you enjoyed this class as much as I did, and I'm really looking forward to the rest of them. There is a link to the playlist for the classes in the description box down below. If you haven't joined or subscribed to this channel, go ahead and hit those links in the description box down below. There's also links of where to find me on social media. I'd love to see how your coasters turned out. Let me know in the comments down below if you have any questions, and we'll see you in the next class. Stay hooked.